Hi, this is Jeanne Blasberg, and this is the story behind my story.
You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Ford,
Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Charlene Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Jeanne Blasberg.
Thanks for tuning into Author Stories. You can find all of the archives of the show at hankgarner.com. And when you're there, click on the subscribe buttons in the right-hand sidebar. There's places where you can subscribe in iTunes and Google Play and Stitcher Radio and even YouTube, hankgarner.com. I'd like to thank some sponsors that make this show possible. Grammarly. Go to getgrammarly.com/Hank to sign up for your free account. Grammarly, built by linguists and language lovers, Grammarly's writing app finds and corrects hundreds of complex writing errors, so you don't have to. Grammarly corrects hundreds of grammar, punctuation, and spelling mistakes while also catching contextual errors, improving your vocabulary, and suggesting style improvements. Go to getgrammarly.com/Hank when you're working on that new book before you send it to your final editor. Let Grammarly take a pass at it. You'd be surprised at what it'll catch, and your editor will thank you for it. Brand new from Stefan Bolt's The White Dragon Omnibus Edition. This book has been 2 years in the making for those of us that have been following along as Stefan has released the books Genesis, Crucible, and Alchemy. We have been on the edge of our seats waiting to see how he would finish the series, and now you can read it all in one volume. No waiting. Genesis, Crucible, and Alchemy, The White Dragon series by Stefan Boltz. Available now. There's links to it in the show notes. Stay tuned after the show for an audiobook clip from Richard Gleaves, the Jason Crane series. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Jeanne McWilliams Blasberg on the show with me. Jeanne has a book called Eden that is absolutely fantastic, and I'm happy to have you here to talk about it today. Jeanne, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Hank. I'm happy to be here, too.
Well, Jeanne, before we get into talking about all kind of Eden goodness, we begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
Oh, wow. Well, let's see. I'm an only child. I don't know if there's probably other only children out there listening, but you tend to spend a good amount of time by yourself figuring out ways to entertain yourself. And I have a memory of writing these stories. I always had this fun idea that a reader should participate in how, making key choices for the characters. So I'd write these little stories and I'd say, if you would like, the man to open the door, turn to page 4. If you would like the man to sit down and eat dinner and not open the door, turn to page 6. So anyway, I just really remember writing those kind of stories and having them go on and all sorts of tangents and all sorts of different scenarios. I'd fill books with those kind of things. I guess I just spent a lot of time reading, and I had a very active imagination. I remember having imaginary friends until I was about 7 or 8 years old. So that might say a little bit about me.
We know the active imagination is kind of funny about writers. I have a friend on Facebook, and she finished a new novel yesterday, and she posted, and I'm paraphrasing, so forgive me, Meg, but she said it's really funny that I can make a living doing because of this personality trait that got me in so much trouble when I was a kid.
Absolutely. It's funny because you get in trouble exaggerating or, fibbing or telling, your own version of the truth. But if you become a fiction writer, those are really good qualities to have.
Yeah, you become sought after.
Exactly. I can really exaggerate well and, blow up a scene.
It's so funny.
True.
So funny. What kinds of stories really interested you, reading and the kinds of things that you like to imagine?
Well, I guess starting off, I'm about 53 years old. So when I was young, reading strong female characters was really an important, really important. The characters I'd read in books would almost be role models. I remember as a young girl reading Harriet the Spy, and it was, wow, a young girl who actually sneaks into people's houses and keeps a journal. I was fascinated by that, and it kind of empowered me as a little girl. But as I've grown older and kind of have had a very full and complete life, relationships are what I'm most interested in reading about, emotional interior drama. And those are reading those types of stories and having emotions and nuance and subtlety explained in a revelatory way. Those were the reading experiences that really, I guess, pushed me towards being a writer. I wanted to see if I could also explain my own experiences in an artful way and thus kind of process some of it, but also share it and see if other women, daughters, mothers, children could relate to it, and really to just start the conversation with people who maybe experienced the world in a way I had, or seen things in a way I'd seen them. So that was really what got me going.
Well, and that idea of of human relationships and getting down to the emotional connections between people, and that's really, to me, what writing is all about. And we talk a lot about writing in different genres, and I like to say that the genre tropes, if you will, are really just window dressing on a story that's about people and about how we interact with each other. And whether it's science fiction or fantasy or horror or romance or historical fiction, we're really exploring how we interact with each other and why humans do the things that we do.
I couldn't agree with you more, Hank. I feel like when you're reading something, regardless of the genre, you might see a passage that explains a universal truth in a way that you hadn't heard it explained before. And that's really the pleasure in reading, is seeing an author kind of encapsulate an experience or a feeling, an emotion, a reaction that you've had as the reader, that we've all had as humans, but describing it in this revelatory way. I think to see that done well is really exciting, and it spurs the book lover into trying to write the same herself. So
exactly,
it can happen in any genre. It's just that beauty of being able to describe something well.
Sure. Jeanne, they say that to be a great writer, you need to do two things and do them a lot. And one of those is reading, because you need to understand kind of how books work and structure. And the way you learn a lot of that is just to take in a lot of it. The other thing they say is to write a lot, because you have to practice doing it to get better at it. And I like to add a third to that. I think that you need to be around people, and you need to observe, how people interact, and to listen to language and listen to how people communicate with each other. Eden is your first book, and you talked a minute ago about kind of having all of these life experiences, this full life, and then wanting to write out of that. Do you feel like having these life experiences other than writing has really equipped you to tell the kinds of stories that you do?
Well, it's definitely given me a lot of material. As you just said, there is a craft that needs to be learned. And so, in order to express myself in a way that readers would appreciate, in order to express myself in a story that a reader would want to take a journey with or take on a journey with me, those were skills that I think I'm a perennial student and I'm still learning. With Eden, it took a long time, but I had these female characters that were, yes, truly based on my life experience and experiences of women in my family. And I had pages and pages, hundreds of pages of these characters written out. And I was just lucky with Eden that I had the patience to work with a lot of people, a lot of editors, and learn how to distill, this 800-page monstrosity and distill it down into a 340-page story. So writing coming up with the material, yes, being 53 years old and various relationships and living in lots of different places across the planet and having lots of different roles, I have a ton of material, but the writing is something that I am very humble about. Definitely don't have that mastered. There's always ways to improve, and I'm continually working on that.
Well, and writing is one of those things that as soon as you think you have it figured out, you realize very quickly that you're still a student. And I don't care if you've published one novel or 100 novels. It's still a growth process until the day we die.
Well, yeah, I'd say being a writer is also, like I said earlier, it's a way of processing things, and it's a way of it's a form of self-discovery and self-awareness every time you sit down at the page. That's why people love to do it. It's hard, but when you kind of make a connection with one of those truths, there's nothing greater. There's no greater buzz. There's no greater high. I can be sitting at my computer and 4 hours have gone by, but it feels like 10 minutes because I'm just so, caught up in it. So that's why we do the hard work, is for those moments of artistic euphoria. But yes, I would say that another thing that's really been fun in my writing life is connecting, most recently in the last 5 or 6 years, with a creative writing center here in Boston, where I continue to take classes and I join writing groups, so that my solitary pursuit as a writer is also complemented by trusted people who will give me feedback all the time. And I think that's really helped me move at a better pace. It's constant feedback, constant objective third eye critiquing. And that's one thing that I can't overestimate enough as being worthwhile. So,
Jeanne, you've been an avid journaler throughout your life. What role has journaling played in your life, and how do you feel that adds to or inspires your creativity, or just kind of what role does journaling play for you?
Well, that's a good question. I think my journals are a way to kind of process maybe some of the more mundane things that are going on in my life in order to clear up space for the serious writing. Every morning I try to write 3 to 5 pages. And although I say mundane, I do spend my time with a writer's eye for what I'd like to write about. Almost like kids go around thinking about what they want to take pictures of to Instagram. I go through my day knowing I'm going to be writing pages the next day and kind of noticing things in a little bit off-kilter, particular way to, me. And so I'd say my journaling every day is a combination of unusual observations, snippets of dialogue I might hear, things that struck me, but also a good portion of it are is just kind of processing those things that are taking up space in my head. And I feel like once I write them down and I do my writing longhand, there's some sort of purge that happens, and I get them onto my journal, and then I am kind of on a roll. It's like doing your calisthenics before you sit down to do like a serious like race or something, or it's like stretching before a real workout. It's like now I'm limbered up. I've been writing, and now I'm ready to kind of go into fantasy land or fictional land and let my characters or scenes kind of show up in my head.
Tell me, you spent a career in finance, and but talking to you, I know that you have always had this storytelling aspect of yourself. What made you want to start putting pen to paper in the pursuit of writing a novel as on top of the personal writing that you do? What was the catalyst that made you want to break out and write something to publish?
Well, first of all, a career in finance, I think, is a generous term. I was in my early 20s, late 20s, early 30s. I mean, looking back, I took myself very seriously, but I was just a baby, still trying to figure out what I was meant to do in this world. And graduating from college, I was really pleased to be able to kind of find a job where I could support myself and live in New York City and kind of continue with this exciting dream of being self-sufficient. But, I think down deep, I always knew what I was doing was kind of, it was good for making a living and providing myself with options that, a secure financial picture provides. But I wasn't like so good at it that I loved it and I jumped out of bed every morning like this is why I was put on the planet. But I think as you get older, you realize that, life is short and you better do the things you really want to do because time is precious. And there was a story lodged inside of me. My journaling, my writing was starting to take up more of my time as I was home with my kids, and I was studying memoir, but there were some personal stories, some themes. I would say there were themes that really I was obsessed with, and those were themes around unplanned pregnancy, whether a child remains with their birth family or doesn't remain with their birth family in certain situations, and the comparison of like how those children's lives turn out. And that was the idea that really spurred me on to write Eden. But it took a long time for me to understand like themes and trends and emotions weren't the scaffolding that you could build a story on. Those were kind of the accoutrements to a story, and I had to figure out what the setting would be and what the plot would be. Really, I wrote this whole first draft that didn't even have a real plot. It was just a lot of women interacting with each other. But anyway, I learned the craft of writing, but in the process of writing Eden, but the real impetus was watching things that happened to my grandmother, my mother, myself, my mother-in-law, and thinking, I've got to write a book about this. There are so many important stories that these women have never been able to tell in their own lifetime, and I wanted to find a way to weave them all together in one fictional family.
And so Eden was born. How did you begin the process of threading a narrative together? You've got these big themes in mind, but that's not all that the book is about. It's really interesting to hear what the author's what the catalyst for a book was, and then seeing what the book becomes. It's really fascinating. So, as you know from writing this book, you can begin with a theme, but then the book grows into so much more than that, and then encompasses that theme, in a way that just having a conversation about the theme never could be. How did you know when you had found the narrative thread, that was going to be the backbone of this book?
Well, that was really the last thing to come. It's crazy. I was actually listening to a masterclass on audio yesterday by Margaret Atwood, who said she never starts a book with an idea. It usually starts with a character or an object or a setting. And I really, I wish I'd known that I'd had that advice early. I started with this idea, and it was kind of like going about it backwards, but I was a total rookie. And I wrote this first draft while our family was doing an expat, 3-year sojourn in Europe. And I had a lot of free time. So I came back to the U.S. in 2012 with this huge manuscript. And the first editor who looked at it said, these characters are great, but, there's no plot. You need a story. What's happening here? We need action. There's too much exposition and not enough scene. And so I really went back to school in 2012 and started taking a lot of classes on the craft of novel writing. And I, at the time, was spending summers, or had been spending summers, in this town in southern Rhode Island. And light bulb goes off. Well, actually, light bulb had gone off earlier, but because I set everything in this town. And I found that the town was an interesting place because it's one of these very old-fashioned summer enclaves where generations of family have been returning year after year, decade after decade, generation after generation. So I thought this 4-generational saga is going to be set in this town, and there's going to be financial issues, and there's going to be that whole family dynamic of everybody kind of getting along on the surface but not really getting along underneath the surface, and I kind of like that as a subtext. So I had to kind of come up with what was going to happen, and the drama around long lost people coming back and finding the family. I started to put it together really in the last couple of revisions is when this narrative got very tight, and this book wasn't completely about ideas and emotion. So I went at it totally ass backwards, but everybody goes on their own journey, so that's how it happened.
Well, isn't it exciting though when you spend time with these characters and with the setting, and then all of a sudden, the light bulb goes on. That's just as exciting as that initial idea that gets you fired up when you've worked with it, and then all of a sudden it reveals itself in the story. That's a pretty great feeling, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a great feeling, but I would have to say, the whole kind of summer house, the family house, kind of nobody having the means to keep it up, and the person coming back that nobody knew about, and financial ruin, and who's going to save it. I mean, those are tried and true plots. So, but, we're familiar enough with them, and we're comfortable enough with them that then that's kind of the scaffolding that you can hang all of these strange characters on. And so what I really needed to do was find that scaffolding. And it wasn't so much as a light bulb as just figuring out how a story works and what different plots really work. And it's almost just learning the mechanics of something. Yes, you're doing it artfully, and you, as an artist, you want to believe it's unique and it's very individual to you and your story. But I truly believe with a lot of hard work and study, you can figure out some of the basic parts of writing, and then the rest of it is just patience and letting it come to you. But yeah, I would say I agree with you. It's that patience and that and the light bulbs are pretty exciting. Like I said, that's what puts you back in front of your desk day after day.
Right. And you mentioned the vacation house and the family drama and the fear of losing things. These are tried and true plots. But what did that setting and that plot mean to you? Was this something you drew on from personal experience? Where did that idea come from?
Yeah, so like I said, I've been spending a lot of summers, maybe the last 20 summers since my kids were little, in this small town in Rhode Island, very similar to Long Harbor, Rhode Island. And I'd never been to a place where people felt such a visceral connection. Like losing this place or never going back to this place would almost be like, it would almost be like cutting off a limb. Or losing a part of themselves. You know, I'd lived a lot in California and Texas, and not to say that you can't have those same experiences off the East Coast, but there's something about this like blue-blooded, this is where we're from, this is, you know, these places are like part of our family and part of our soul, and the act of returning, there's so much embedded in the act of returning summer after summer. It equates to love. It equates to commitment. It equates to just a desire to engage with the family. So there is a lot invested in these places and in these homes and in the act of returning. And almost to the point where these places and things really become proxies for conversation. Instead of talking about their love for each other or talking about the love of their family history, it's like they just imbue these things and these places with those emotions and get lazy about keeping up the actual relationships. And so after spending time in these places, in this place, I thought this is really unusual. And when I wrote about it, and now kind of in conversation with readers, that seems to be something that really strikes a chord. People get in touch with me and say, oh, my family's had a place, you know, in the Carolinas or in Canada or here or there. And let me tell you, it really struck a chord. If you missed a vacation or didn't go back for this holiday, or, you know, people are fighting over who gets this week in the summer or that week in the summer. It's just like, it doesn't have to be a big rambling house in Rhode Island. It could be like just this family tradition, any type of tradition, but it's imbued with the same emotional power. And I think I found just this, you know, I found something that people really could resonate with, and that was really fun.
And what's really fun, especially in your story, is it's a multi-generational story, and we've got layers of interactions between people and interactions between people and the place, and then the secrets, which is always a great time. But it's almost like the place, the house, the Eden becomes a metaphor for what's going on with the people, and it's this strange interaction between place and people. Was that something that really resonated with you?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the house and the book aren't called Eden for no reason. It's this paradise, but a garden, you know, but it's not always a paradise for some people. It's actually, it can be a prison. Eden itself was built by the patriarch of the family in the early 1900s. Kind of during this boom in the 20s before the stock market crash. And she was beautiful and larger than life and elegant and with arms spreading out across this lawn as if she wanted to wrap everybody in a big protective hug. But then she's neglected during the wars. Her shingles turn gray. Her roof starts to sag. You know, she ages just like a woman might age. Gets some bats up in the attic. You know, she is experiencing life in a parallel way to my main character, Becca, who's actually born just as Eden has been constructed. So totally planned metaphor. I love books that have metaphor, biblical references, allusions that, you know, you can also, that just add richness to the story. So those were the type of things I really had fun weaving in. I never knew if I'd write another book, so I got quite ambitious with this one. And that's one of my favorite, one of my favorite elements of the book is kind of the metaphor of Genesis. Like, there's a serpent that enters this world that's corrupting. There is a flood that comes through in the guise of the 1938 hurricane. So there are a lot of other references. All my names are biblical names. The Jewish matriarchs are, their names are prominent in a reference to the fact that these family stories and these family dramas that women are kind of at the center of have been going on since our civilization first recorded family stories with, thousands of years ago with in Genesis. And I just like that idea that generation after generation, human beings sort of change, but don't really ever change.
And this is the perfect kind of story to deal with the some of the issues that you said were important to you and that really fascinated you. Talking about unwanted pregnancies and then what happens to those children and then how really, how families are made and which is, another great biblical concept when you really start pulling the layers back. Tell me a little bit about that story thread and why it's so important to you.
Well, I mentioned I'm an only child. I mean, I think I figured out fairly early on that my parents hadn't planned on on having me. They got married when my mom was 3 months pregnant. I did the math on my fingers, just like one of my characters in the book. I think that knowledge for, throughout my life was something that made me look at big families or families with lots of children in a different light. I also met people who were adopted, and so I often wanted, in my mind, compared my outcome to their outcome and wondered which would have been better. What would have happened to me if my mother had given me up for adoption? And my parents loved me, and I had a wonderful childhood. So it's not to say that this book is like the result of any deep scars or wounds, but I think we all carry around as part of our identity the story around our birth. Just like, I don't know, if you think of a human as a world, there's a lot of creation. There's worlds created, and all of these women are both the result of a certain story they carry around, and then they go and have their own children and try to do a better job or a different job around the story they give to their children. So I guess my personal experience with my own identity and kind of resolving that is what gave me kind of the emotional knowledge to write this book. And then the deep kind of confidential conversations I'd had with people who were adopted, that gave me some confidence to write those characters, as well as doing a lot of research around women who went away in the years before Roe v. Wade to have their children in maternity homes. So there was some emotional knowledge I had of my own that I could rely on, and there was a lot of research I could do. But that's why I felt like I was the right one to write this story.
What do you hope people take away from Eden, Jeanne? What do you hope readers are left with at the end?
Well, I guess the message I think Eden leaves people with, or I would hope it leaves people with, is that we can choose what we want to inherit from our parents. A lot of things get handed down, wanted and unwanted, and we should really say no thank you to the unwanted things. We should realize as people what is valuable and what's actually damaging. And then we should also, as readers and humans, know that every human life, regardless of how it came into the world, is just as valuable as every other human life, and that you shouldn't feel discounted or ashamed or even like, I don't know, better based on the story in which you came into the world with. We're all on equal footing. So I think I try to end my book with that message, and that message for people to kind of rid themselves of any shame they're carrying around with their birth story. So yeah, I guess it's multi-layered, but really if you were to just distill it down, it's like write your own story for your life and discard what's been put upon you.
Absolutely. Jeanne, are you working on a follow-up to Eden?
Well, I'm working on a second novel that I kind of started when Eden was out on submission. So it's not exactly a sequel, but it does have an overlap in that my main character visits Long Harbor, Rhode Island for a summer. So you get to visit the setting again. It's similar in that I'm exploring maternal relationships again, this time a mother-son relationship. And I think that, getting the essence of that relationship is equally important. I'm excited. I have a third novel that's being plotted right now that will bring Eden and the second novel all together, and have characters from Eden, Sarah, Rachel, and Ray, the baby who's born at the very end, will be coexisting in a world with some of the kids in the second novel. My second novel is called The Nine, and its anticipated publication date is August 2019. So I'm busy in final revisions on that right now.
Nice. Well, Jeanne, we're going to send everyone to pick up a copy of Eden. It's available everywhere now. Jeanne, if people are just learning about you and your work, where can they connect with you online to maybe learn more about you and follow news about the new books and all that good stuff?
My website is JeanneBlasberg.com. It's a great resource for everything you just mentioned. I also have a mailing list you can sign up for on the website, and that will assure you get, first notice of the next book's release.
Excellent. Jeanne, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show today. We're going to send everybody to your website and to pick up Eden. Thanks so much for taking time today.
Thanks for inviting me. It was a lot of fun to talk with you.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
He was just 7 when his parents died. Eliza received the news of their death on Halloween morning, but she kept it from Jason for 2 more days. She sent him out trick-or-treating. He was a vampire. He spun around in the living room, eyes wild, shouting, "I am the living dead!" and wondering why they didn't laugh. On November 2nd, after school, Eliza told him. His parents were dead. It was a bleak time. He wanted silence. He wanted darkness. He cried great, rolling tears. In early spring, he ran away from home, which means he stole $5, put a box of Cheez-Its in a pillowcase, and walked 7 blocks. He slept in a field, glad to be miserable. He wanted to freeze to death, to be with his mom and dad, to not feel anything. His grandmother found him at a playground near the river, fallen in the dust with his shoulder against the slope of a teeter-totter, the other end riderless, suspended. He saw her trudging up the hill. She looked twice her usual size in her winter coat, and frightening. "Let's go home, Jason." He knew he was in trouble. He knew what home meant. It meant a paddling or worse. Eliza opened her big winter coat and, straining, slipped down into the dust next to him. She drew him into her warm body, wrapping him in the coat. She flipped the collar up, rubbed her hands together, and cupped them over his ears. "Brr, you're an ice cube. But it feels good, kinda. It's good to get really cold sometimes. Wakes you up." They were cheek to cheek against the teeter-totter, bundled together as the sky turned from gray to orange. The ground stung, but they sat a long time. "Why?" The word was just a tiny puff of vapor that slipped from his lips and into the wind. But it was also big. Big and heavy. She knew what his little boy heart had asked. She understood the universe of longing and confusion and hurt in that one whispered word. We all die, baby. In all the long, long history of the world, there's not been one of us who didn't. I'll die, he said. It wasn't a question, but it was. Yes, and I'll die. A lot sooner. And the why is just... it's just there. It just is. We're not around to see what was before us, and we're not here to see what happens after. The trees on the edge of the playground shivered with dawn. But we're here now, she said, and pulled him tighter until his cheekbone felt sore from pressing against hers. And it has to be enough. It has to be. Look at all we have now. Really look. He really looked. It was just a small playground off the main road of an unimportant New England town. But in the distance he could see the wide Kennebec River, and the sky was pink above it. He saw small ships moored, trimmed in red and baby blue, rocking against the current. He saw a robin on the railing of a dock, toes pointed inward, making occasional hops that were also flight. The town was waking up. There was a light in the bakery and one in the grocery. There was an empty can of beer on a picnic table and wildflowers by the road. There was wind and trees swaying gently. There was his own breath in his own lungs. There was his grandmother, her body, her heartbeat against his back as he leaned against her chest. There was his own life and hers, and a world to live them in. And it was enough.